Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, London Bridge comes under attack, resulting in 2 deaths. A 1,400-year-old relic is returned to the birthplace of Jesus Christ. And stay tuned, because later we'll reveal proof of what the Beatles have been trying to tell us all along. A somber yet tense tone has taken root in London this week following a horrific attack in London Bridge, resulting in 2 deaths and 3 injuries. Wearing what turned out to be a fake explosive vest at the time, terror suspect Usman Khan is reported to have begun his assault outside an event for the rehabilitation of prisoners. In waving knives and ranting, Khan is then said to have killed 25-year-old Jack Merritt and another yet unnamed woman.
We're still piecing together the exact details of what happened. It's already clear that this cowardly act was immediately countered by some incredible acts of bravery, both by members of the public and from police officers. We know this attacker was attending an event called Learning Together, and some of those present at that event were people who confronted this attacker to try and stop him.
In a video taken of the incident, a number of bystanders worked to disarm and neutralize Khan until police arrive. And they actually used whatever was on hand, including a narwhal tusk and a fire extinguisher to do it. Then when police appeared, they subsequently confronted and shot Khan dead, and a full investigation into the incident has been launched.
It was a fast-moving, dynamic situation. We had to cordon off and lock down a significant part of the city. We did that with terrific support from the public, and we are slowly bringing those areas back to normality. It is a very intense scene. There is a lot of forensic work going on, and it will be some time before the entire scene is released, but we are looking at where we can bring parts of the city back into life so that Londoners can continue their business.
But the biggest question that has everyone reeling now is, how did Khan, a terrorist known to authorities, commit this crime in the first place? Especially as Khan was convicted in 2012 as part of an al-Qaeda-linked cell charged with planning attacks on Parliament and the United States Embassy in London, as well as the attempted assassination of then-Mayor Boris Johnson and 2 local rabbis, amongst others. Well, the answer is unfortunately that he was released from his 16-year sentence in December 2018 as part of an automatic release program. And at no time did the parole board review Khan personally to see if he had relinquished his extremist views. Further, at the time of sentencing, the judge even noted that Khan was a more serious jihadi than his accomplices. But apparently, since his 2018 release, officials say that he'd been complying with the conditions of his parole, though what those conditions are is still a mystery, as is how they failed to prevent this attack. Either way, officials across the board are now criticizing the existence of such a release program while initiating a full review into its mechanisms.
As we say in the manifesto, that we want to toughen up sentences for serious and violent offences, and I've said for a long time now that I think the practice of automatic early release, where you cut a sentence in half and let really serious violent offenders out early, simply isn't working, and I think you've had some very good evidence of how that isn't working, I'm afraid.
Meanwhile, the Islamic State is claiming that Khan committed this crime in their name, though the organization did not claim responsibility directly, and no direct links have either been established at all. Rather, Khan has instead been linked to terror-supporting Imam Anjem Choudhury, who was also released from prison in the UK in 2018. Now, in the wake of the weekend stabbings, many are now drawing comparisons between the London terrorist attack and Palestinian terrorism aimed at Israelis. But despite the many similarities, global media outlets are reluctant to cover these events through the same lens. And here to explain now is Israeli news anchor and journalist Lital Shemesh. Lital, thank you so much for joining with us.
Hi, good evening.
Now, you notice a difference between the way that terror attacks are being covered inside and outside of Israel, is that correct?
Yes, of course. I mean, I've been covering this issue for quite some time. I mean, you can see every time there's a terror attack occurring in Israel, the headlines on the international media would be a Palestinian was shot by a police officer. Only when you scroll down the item, you can see that that Palestinian was actually stabbing Israelis, stabbing Jews time and time again. CNN is choosing to write the word terrorist in brackets, as if it's something we can debate about whether that person was a terrorist or not. Whilst the entire weekend I was following the news abroad, the CNN, Fox News, people were covering this story 24/7, the stabbing attack in London. Whilst when it's happening in Israel, it's as if it's something, something routine. Again, someone was stabbing Israelis, stabbing Jews, as if it's something we should just take for granted. And I think it's just simply wrong.
So what have you noticed about the current attack in the UK then? How would you characterize the differences?
Immediately, everyone were talking about the fact that there is a terrorist. You can see the headlines were all around the victim. There was a terror attack in England. All the international media was covering it, and not from the side of the terrorist being a victim, whilst whenever there is a terror attack in Israel, you can see on the headlines what happened to the stabber, to the Palestinian who was stabbing Jews, and not the victims. You won't see Israelis were killed in a stabbing attack. You would see
Sure.
You would see a Palestinian was shot by a police officer after trying to stab Jews. And you can see that time and again. And that one time I was in England, and I've asked a reporter of the BBC, why is that every time there's a terror attack in Israel, you're covering it from the side of the person who was the terrorist, and you're writing in the headlines what happened to the Palestinian. And he told me a very concerning answer. He told me, it's more clickbait when you have the Palestinians on the headlines and not Jews or Israelis. So it's simply creating fake news for the sake of getting more clickbaits for your website. I think it's very concerning. And it's also important for me to say it's also a combination of pure anti-Semitism, as if it's acceptable when Islamic extremist jihadists are doing it in Israel, are murdering Jews in Israel. It shouldn't be acceptable, not in England, not in Europe, and especially not in Israel.
So my final question for you, Lital, is there anything that Israel can really do to change this other than, asking for corrections from different publications, which, as we all know, first of all, is reactionary and oftentimes too late?
I think people in Israel are constantly trying to fight those all those fake news, trying to create headlines in social media. For example, when CNN decided to publish all the recent attack during the Ramadan, the recent Islamic attack all over Europe, and they somehow forgot to put Israel on the map, people in Israel started emailing CNN editors to place Israel back on the map, and they've apologized and then published a new map. So I think that could be a way to fight all the fake news and everything that's all the misleading coverage on Israel on international media.
All right, Lital, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
In other news, Israel's position in the Middle East could see some massive changes now that private citizens are questioning their government regimes with massive and sometimes violent demonstrations.
يعني بعمر الورد شايل ورده شيل بعد شايل ورد وشايل علم يضربق الناس يعني علما طالعين هذا فدوه للوطن هذا.
Things are seemingly taking a turn for the worse in the Middle East as protests across Lebanon, Iran, and Iraq continue to challenge the leadership. And now 3 more demonstrators are dead after being shot during protests in Iraq, while 58 others have been wounded. But the chaos and calls for action continue even after Iraqi Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi has submitted his resignation letter to Parliament. And lawmakers now have to decide whether to accept the resignation or bring it to a vote. Abdul Mahdi's resignation comes amid high turmoil as citizens demand better social services and higher employment levels while calling on the country to keep Iran out of Iraqi policy. Also, the resignation comes after 40 protesters were killed days prior, and a top Shiite cleric withdrew from the government. In fact, so far, 400 have died in total during the course of the Iraqi demonstrations, and fire, tear gas, and sound bombs have all been used as mechanisms to break up the crowds. But again, even with the resignation of the prime minister, many protesters say it's not enough, calling the resignation just the start of a much-needed regime renewal with all new players in power.
نريد نوصل لهم رسالة بأن عادل عبد المهدي مو كل المشكلة، هو جزء من المشكلة. عادل عبد المهدي حجر مكسور في لعبة الشطرنج، فهو مو المشكلة. المشكلة مع المنظومة اللي جابت عادل عبد المهدي. هم واهمين إذا يعتبرون عادل عبد المهدي كبش فداء يضحون به والشعب راح ينسحب. الشعب مستمر وتظاهراتنا السلمية مستمرة حتى تغيير المنظومة اللي جابت عادل عبد المهدي.
To that end, Iraqis have also set the Iranian consulate on fire and stamped on photos of Iranian authorities. Iran, on the other hand, publicly calls for the demolition of Israel while spreading its influence to nearby countries. But Iraqis are saying no more. Then, speaking of Iran, the regime in Tehran has also now been struggling with growing unrest. And Iran has been accused of minimizing the number of deaths from rallies and protests. According to one human rights group, more than 160 demonstrators have been killed and thousands more have been wounded or arrested. But Iran's deputy interior minister says that statistics from international organizations are not credible and that the reported figures are exaggerated. Now moving into politics, Israel's leadership has just 11 days left to come up with a potential prime minister with 61 supporting votes. So with the deadline looming, both the Likud and the Blue and White parties are again racing to get signatures. And joining us now with more is Michael Kleiner, president of the Likud Supreme Court and former Likud member of Knesset. Thank you again for being with us. Now, Here we are again, the Likud, the Blue and White, they're going at it again. But nobody seems to have changed any stances. So what are we looking at?
Surprise, surprise. Avigdor Lieberman said that he will grant his signatures to both parties, which means that probably both will have 61. And then the president said...
Well, but is that how the math is done, or is it that neither have 61 unless he devotes, definitively his mandates to one person or the other?
No, I thought this is a reasonable interpretation of the law, but the attorney of the Knesset decided otherwise, and therefore he said every member of Knesset can sign can grant as many signatures as he wants. So if both will come with more than 61, the president was smart enough, President Rivlin, to say that he will ask those people who signed for two whom they prefer. But if it happens, so actually we gain another, it's not 11 days, it's another 14 days.
No, we have 11 days to get 61, and then that person gets another 14.
And the president has 2 days to decide or to call him and give him those 14 days. It will become between Christmas and New Year. I made the calculation.
You think somebody's going to get that 14 days? Really?
Probably. Probably, because nobody wants election. Lieberman made a commitment to grant his signatures, so he will give them to someone, I guess. If they speak about a national unity or a narrow coalition, I don't think that Lieberman will go with a united Arab list.
Well, okay, so now going back to the Likud's internal primaries, which there aren't any scheduled as far as I'm aware yet. But Yoav Kish, Knesset member Yoav Kish, is suggesting that Netanyahu give another Likud member a try. What do you say to that?
This is what I say. It doesn't matter. What Netanyahu will say. I don't think he will do so. He believes, like many other Israelis, that he is the most qualified leader to deal today with the external threat that don't disappear because we are busy in election and Iran is doing its work and developing its nuclear capability, and someone has to turn to the European Union and to America and to Mr. Putin and to the United Nations, and the best, most qualified man is Netanyahu. I hope that people will be patriotic enough to give him in a national unity government the first 2 years to complete his job, and then he will pass it over to Mr. Gantz in a rotation, or Mr. Lieberman will decide to come back home to his natural base of the right-wing camp and will make a 63 coalition. In both cases, Netanyahu is the one who gets a chance. If there are new elections, there will be primaries. Every member can put his candidacy against Netanyahu. Gideon Saar, which is one of the prominent Likud members of Knesset, announced he will do so. But for this term, for this Knesset,
looks like Netanyahu comes out.
Netanyahu was already elected. Why should he give up?
All right, so my final question, very short. If we do end up going to a third election, do you see major changes in the numbers of the Knesset with respect to each party?
According to the polls, it will be the same. And in May, we will speak here about the fourth election, 2nd of 2020. But in politics, you never know. And so...
Well, I guess that's a good place to leave it. Michael, thank you so much for coming in. All right, after a decade of zero diplomatic ties between Israel and Bolivia, the South American country is now announcing a complete turn in policy. And here with some insights as to why that is, as well as what it means, is ILTV's Shanna Fold. Shanna, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Take it away.
So I'm very excited and interested in this story because there's a real economic spin to it. Now, the foreign minister of Bolivia has just announced that she is renewing, I would say economic ties, that's what it comes down to, but political ties with Israel after 10 years of Bolivia and Israel not having any diplomacy. Now, there's no consulate for Israel in Bolivia, and it used to be that Israelis didn't need to get visas to visit Bolivia, which is a real hotspot. And 10 years ago, the president made it so that Israelis had to get visas. It slowed down tourism, and it really took a hit on the economy.
Now, this was after Tzuk Eitan in 2008, the Israeli war with 2009. I'm sorry, cast lead. I'm sorry.
Yes. So in 2009, that's when there was a turning point for Bolivian President Evo Morales. He actually, at that point, called Israel a terrorist state. And he changed this whole stance on Israel and said that he was no longer having diplomatic ties. Now, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, not that this isn't amazing, because it absolutely is. But what does it mean in the grander scheme? What does this mean for Israelis, for Bolivians?
Well, I think this is really important because if you've ever backpacked or visited South America, which I have, you'll see Israelis are doing a ton of traveling and they're hopping from one country to the next. And one of those countries is Bolivia. Now, I spoke with Laura Elena. She is a Bolivian tour guide, and she's the owner of a tour company there, and she lives in the north of Bolivia. What's interesting about her is that she's Jewish, she speaks Hebrew, and she actually came to Israel and went back to Bolivia because her family tour business was suffering so badly from the downfall of diplomatic ties in Bolivia that she came back and started working out ways to get Israelis visas so that they could visit Bolivia again.
Wow, so did she have like maybe you could say a direct hand in this change in policy then?
I don't know that she had a direct hand in the policy.
So I guess my last question is, what was behind this change? What kind of put the fire under?
Well, I'm not really one to say what exactly caused the foreign minister to make this change, but I will say that there's a new regime in Bolivia, one that is more friendly toward Israel, and ding, 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 one friendly toward the U.S., which previously the government there was not so friendly with the U.S.
Well, that's a lot of big differences then. We'll see who goes to Bolivia and how that is. Shanna, thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
In other news, a tiny ancient relic has now been returned to the birthplace of Jesus centuries after being gifted away, and ILTV's Nittany Manson has the scoop.
1,400 years ago, a small wooden relic believed to have been part of Jesus Christ's manger was sent to Rome as a present to the Pope. But now the ancient shard, enshrined in an ornate silver case, has made its way back, as the Vatican returns the relic to the Church of St. Catherine in Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. And this regifting also comes coinciding with Advent, or the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, marking an incredible once-in-a-lifetime Christmas present to the Christians of the region. That said, while the thumb-sized shard will now stay permanently in Judea and Samaria, the original request from Palestinian Authority President Abbas was to borrow the whole manger.
أكيد شعور فرح وإحنا فخورين إنه يجي قسم من هذا المذود عنا على بيت لحم لأن بنشعر بروح ربنا أكثر موجودة معنا وهذا إشي ثبات إلنا لمسيحيتنا كوجودنا كيان مسيحي في بيت لحم وإحنا بنتأمل كل المذود يرجع لنا يعني لبيت لحم.
Still, it's an amazing gift, and hundreds of worshippers arrived from all over to receive the relic, including a group of young Palestinian scouts who played bagpipes while the crowd looked on and took pictures. Then later in the evening, the Bethlehem City Christmas tree was lit for the coming month. So it seems that Thanksgiving is officially over and the holiday season is here. So happy holidays to all.
All right, now you know what time it is. It's time to learn about some new, amazing places to visit here in the Holy Land. This is a side of Israel that most people have not seen before, and it's brought to us by Visit to Israel, one of the world's leading Instagram pages about how to travel in the Holy Land. And so without any further ado, here's Ella of Ella Travels the World from Visit to Israel. Take it away.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi.
So our first place will be in north of Israel.
Cool.
It's called the Bethlehem National Park.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. It's pretty known. It houses one of the most spectacular ruins of an ancient city called Bethlehem. Yes. It was a Roman city with an almost perfectly intact amphitheater.
Wow.
Yes.
This is, wow, and there it is. That's gorgeous.
It is. Almost perfectly intact, yeah.
Wow. And then so how much of the ruins can visitors kind of go through, or is it maybe cordoned off in certain areas?
No, it's actually quite
totally open.
Yes. And the excavations also revealed over 20 layers of remains of ancient cultures dating back 6,000, 7,000 years ago.
So before the, I mean,
exactly, we are going before the Romans, yes.
One city built on top of another. That's amazing.
Exactly like that.
Wow, and so, like, is it tough to get there? Should people get a tour, or maybe kind of just look it up and head out?
They should get a tour. It's in the north of Israel. It's not very difficult to get to, but I think the best option to get by is
get like a guided tour. Maybe you'll see what's going on there. Yeah. Okay, so what's our second place?
Our second place lies in the heart of Israel. It's called the Solek Stalactite. Cave.
Stalactite cave, yeah, sure. Yeah. Stalactites, for everybody who's not, maybe they don't know, is those giant calcium deposits
that hang down from the ceiling. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is so cool.
Yes, so it was revealed by accident in 1968. Really? Yeah, they were quarrying with explosives. That's how they found out. Yeah, that there's a cave over there. But they left it as a secret place, never revealed its location for almost 10 years.
Why?
Because the fear was that people will enter the natural reserve and will ruin it, as the stalactites are very delicate.
Right.
Yeah, but it was open in the late 70s for visitors.
I'm assuming they maybe roped off bits so people don't touch and mess with it.
Exactly. Some of the stalactites are dated back to 300,000 years ago.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. I mean, some of these are massive, so they must be ancient.
Hundreds of thousands of years ago.
That's incredible. And like, what kind of mineral is this? Like limestone? Do we know? Or
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. Well, that's okay. I'm just a nerd, and I'm interested.
No, that's very good. No, that's actually really interesting. Well, it makes sense that it's limestone.
Yeah, no, these places are gorgeous. Ella, thank you for sharing them with us again.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and finally for our last story tonight, proof that love really is the best medicine. Over 5 decades ago, the Beatles revolutionized love worldwide, singing simply, "I Want to Hold Your Hand." I wanna hold your hand. A new Israeli study now shows that hand-holding may do more than just bring people closer. Because according to researchers from the University of Haifa, people who hold hands while experiencing pain felt pain less. The study also shows, however, that this works best between people who have a close relationship. Two people who are strangers don't quite get the same benefit. Still, the team is now moving ahead to examine if hand-holding can also reduce emotional pain. But responding to the research, a postdoctoral research fellow named Julia Sulivetto in Sweden has expressed skepticism. She says there may be other explanations for why hand-holding and empathy could affect the way the brain experiences pain. For one, when people are under stress, they feel pain more, but it's less intense when they're feeling relaxed, and a physical touch from a loved one can be the key to relaxation and thus reducing stress. Whichever way you slice it, though, we here at ILTV still think that hand-holding is worth a shot. I wanna hold your hand. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be partly cloudy and cool with average lows across the country of about 58 or 14 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect a slight drop in temperatures as highs settle down around 69 Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius. But as per usual, remember to keep in mind that Jerusalem will be colder than average while Eilat in the south is a bit warmer. And that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.47 shekels to the American dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.